Hello, I am Neil Ramsden, an editor with Undercurrent News. This is the latest in our series of one-on-one interviews, today with Mikael Thinghuus, who is CEO of Royal Greenland and has been for around 11 years now. At the time of recording, Royal Greenland has just announced that Mikael will step down as CEO in the summer of 2022. Hi, Mikael. Thank you for joining us.
Hi.
So yeah, the first question I wanted to ask really was sort of looking back over that full period of around 11 years. I was curious to know really what the main differences in the seafood sector are as we enter 2022 compared to when you first took the job.
I don't think there's any major single changes, actually. I think there's a bunch of little ones, and together perhaps they add up to something bigger. I mean, obviously Asia is a bigger part of demand now than what it was 10 years ago, but even 10 years ago it was a lot more than it was 20 years ago. So it's not like a totally different world. It just takes up more space. I think one thing which has arrived during the last 10 years, and I think will be more important than we all think right now, is the success of increasing success of on-land farming. I think, I mean, Royal Greenland obviously is only wild caught fish, but if you look at the seafood industry in total, I think when we look back at this from the old person's home in a while, this is one of the things we'll say, well, that happened during that decade. And then if I were to point out two more, again, little things, one little thing is that private equity is now becoming increasingly important in the industry compared to what it was 10 years ago. Because with the volatility of the industry, it's not an obvious candidate for financial investments, I would have thought. And then finally, I think when I go to the Groundfish Forum these days, there are more women than men. Not more women than men, more women than what used to be the case. And I think that's positive. If you were to point out something not quite as positive, it is that the average age of the inshore fishermen has increased by almost 10 years during the last 10 years.
Yeah, okay. And then looking back just at the last year or so, with the announcement kind of your stepping down, it was mentioned that 2021 was a really successful year, which may be for somebody kind of not following the company as we do might come as a surprise, because it was ostensibly a difficult year for everybody. So I wondered if I could sort of briefly ask what had made it such a good year. Well,
as we certainly remember in Royal Greenland, as 2020 was a hopeless year. I mean, we made our first loss for almost 10 years. And I think some of the actions that we took during 2020 then helped 2021 improve a lot. I'm sure, like everyone, we cut down costs, we cut down investments, no consultants, no travel, no marketing expenses, and so on. So the level of cost was significantly lower going into 2021 than into 2020, and that certainly contributed a lot. Second thing, which is very important, is that we have a significant position in snow crabs, both in Greenland and in Atlantic Canada, and snow crabs perform very well. And then finally, and which is more promising moving forward, is that also other products improved substantially in prices during the second half of 2021. So if you add it all together, 2021 financially was very successful. And I mean, I'm sure, like everyone, I hope that the effects, not just the health effects, but the financial, commercial consequences of the COVID-19 will soon be behind us. Yeah, and a big part of the last few years, at least, at Royal Greenland has been the kind of divesting of some parts of the business and the move to the North Atlantic champion strategy. Is that
fully in place now, would you say, or is there sort of still some shift left to come in terms of species and supply chain?
No, I would say it's mostly in place now. It's I mean, what we have for as long as I remember, we've had two categories of products. We've had the NAC, so North Atlantic Champion products, and we've had the supporting products. And moving forward, we'll just have. I mean, we're not going to differentiate because the supporting products are quite few and are only there for very good reasons in terms of assortment or specific customer situations.
Yeah, fair enough. And I was going to ask about your outlook for 2022. Obviously, there's only so much sort of detail you can go into as you sort of transition to leaving. But yeah, can you give us an idea perhaps of the big trends that you expect to see continued or change?
I think the world end of 2021 looks a lot better than it did at the end of 2020, and therefore the outlook also is good. I think sometimes people outside of the industry underestimate the volatility of the prices of our different species. So some of the ones that were successful in 2021 might be less so in 2022, and the other way around. But overall, I would say it's quite promising outlook. I think, without becoming philosophical, I think humanity has shown an amazing ability to adapt. So, I mean, if you have a good product like a shell-on shrimp, I mean, in good times it will be sold in the restaurant, but in less good times with the COVID-19, people will actually eat them at home if you get the product to them in the right packaging and the right sales channel. It's actually amazing when you think about the changes to the world during the last 2 years, and where people wear masks, and some countries you can't go to the restaurant, other places you can only go at certain times, there's only half the number of seats, all depending on where you are. And we actually sold more shrimps last year than what we did 3 years ago. So we adapt really well, I find.
Yeah. And you mentioned before Asia as kind of perhaps a more noticeable marketplace to Western companies now. Can you speak in a little bit more detail about kind of how you leave Royal Greenland positioned in that market, kind of how important things like online retail are, and marketing and packaging and that sort of thing?
Yeah. I think it's actually, there's a little bit of ignorance in all of us Westerners that we were surprised that, oh my God, the Asians all of a sudden are eating more than half the fish. But if you look at where the world population has distributed, I mean, I think it's about 3 out of every 5 people on the planet actually live in Asia. And as the levels of income has increased, then obviously Asians have the same ability to consume as the Danes or the Brits or whoever. And I think very importantly, a number of, I wouldn't even, Asian cuisines, Asian cultures attach as much importance to eating as do the French or the Italians, and a lot more than what at least the Danes or the Brits did historically. I mean, these days is different. So you see a per capita consumption of seafood in not just Japan and China, but also in all the coastal regions in Asia, which is significantly higher than what we are used to in Europe and in most of North America. So I still see Asia take a large position. I think I think everyone who actually works in Asia knows that the Asian consumer is at least as discerning as the Western consumer. And I think sometimes, at least historically, there's been many naive companies thinking, okay, I mean, the Chinese will eat anything basically, and that's absolutely not true. they have in China, there's a number of cuisines which are very rich and very diverse, and a lot of products which don't fit into some European cuisines will find their way there. But there's still a tremendous pressure on quality, on timeliness, and on storytelling. So I should say, I think most Western companies have got it now. They understand that the potential is and the opportunities are enormous, but the challenges are equally big.
Yeah.
I mean, we can see it. I mean, we sell a lot of Greenland halibut, obviously, and shell-on prawns in China, but would like to have a broader assortment, and that is not obvious. It's not like you just say, "Oh, well, here's an interesting European product," and everyone says, "Ah, yeah, please give it to me." I mean, it doesn't work like that. It takes years and decades and close partnerships and a deep understanding of the consumers and the situations in which they consume and the cuisines in which they prepare to be successful. I still see a huge potential, and I think even now, where China is the largest market for Royal Greenland, as it is for a number of seafood companies. You mentioned e-tailing, and I think here we will actually have some learning experiences in some of the not just China, but in some of the Asian markets, which are clearly ahead of some of the European markets in this, and where the whole structure is different. And I think in Europe, what we see is that existing retailers are also often the most successful e-tailers. I mean, there are exceptions to that rule, but that's sort of the pattern. Whereas in Asia, at least in the markets I know, it's very often new companies, entirely new companies that do the e-tailing.
Okay. Yeah, I think Royal Greenland has maybe been a bit ahead of the curve in terms of partnering with e-commerce in China and maybe the wider Asian markets. Without kind of revealing trade secrets, can you sort of briefly outline how that development comes about?
No, not really. I mean, as we've been open about, we have an excellent partner in Beiyang, and that's based on personal relationships. It actually shows that the trade shows work because it's people you get to know commercially, and then you meet a couple of times a year at trade shows, and you get mutual confidence in one another, and as trustworthy people and as good business people, good business organizations. So we went that way. I think maybe it takes a little bit of time to understand that if you sit in one country, in one culture, I mean, there are certain things you just cannot do in a different country. And you, I mean, to sit in Greenland or in Denmark and design packaging for Chinese consumers, it's just not the right way to do it. You have to, the people who do that work and understand whether it's good or not, they have to be people who actually go into Chinese supermarkets or markets or whatever and buy and see what else is there and how does it fit. Just like you cannot sit in Tokyo and design, I don't know, cheese packaging for the Danish supermarkets. So a strong realization that you need the local presence. And I mean, again, this is, in my view, an enormously good argument in favor of vertically integrated food companies. Certainly, if you want to be global.
Yeah, interesting. And maybe kind of linking on from e-commerce, I wanted to ask how the coronavirus pandemic has changed kind of the seafood supply chains and marketing over the last couple of years, in your view?
I think for Royal Greenland, the most important change was that food service almost disappeared. I mean, in the month of April, 2020, we had index 20, 25 on food service sales. So we realized that we had to reestablish ourselves in retail to become stronger there again, and we did successfully, but it did take a long time. In that process, and not specifically in Europe, but actually at least as much in North America or in Asia, I think you realize that the products you otherwise sell in food service, if you do something with packaging, package size, and work with the channels, you can actually get them to your retail consumers in a better way than what we did before the pandemic. So, I mean, being forced to rethink to how you get the product to the people who eat it was helpful. I think it made us stronger. And then logistically, you can say, well, how much is a pandemic and how much is just all the containers being in the wrong place and so on. I don't think much good comes out of that, to be honest. I hope it just is over and done with soon.
Yeah. Presumably, with the kind of near disappearance of food service, the hope would be, I guess, to return to what was pre-pandemic normal for you eventually. But with the sort of success of retail in those 2 years, is there still, well, I guess essentially, is there still the raw material supply to meet all of those demands in the next few years?
Well, I mean, supply and demand will typically meet, but at different prices. I still think that high quality and high price seafood, yes, it's excellent to have at home, but I still think it will disproportionately be something that sells through food service, where there's professional cooks. And I think the perception of many people, and that's actually across countries, and certainly younger people, is that it is difficult to prepare seafood. And now you and I know this is not the case. It's often easier than many other things. But with that perception, I think this will be something you eat at the restaurant or at the cafeteria at work. If you're institutionalized, if the hospitals and so on, it will also be something there because of the health benefits. So I think food service will always be a very strong source of demand for seafood, and then retail hopefully will become stronger. But I don't know if it's us as an industry, but at least we need to be a player in educating consumers to understand that seafood is easy, not just healthy, because I think most people actually know that. I mean, there are debatable health benefits of all sorts of foodstuffs, but seafood is actually, all doctors, I think, agree this is healthy for you. Yeah, this is good protein, and somehow we just need to get it to the consumer in a shape where it is perceived as being easy to use, and that you actually don't worry too much about the smell, which is sometimes a factor, and so on. Yeah, it's difficult to understand. If you're an old guy like me, I turned 60 in a few months. So, I mean, we grew up with fish. But many people, the age of the kids, they don't think like that.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned briefly before, which was private equities having kind of more of an interest and a position in seafood. I think that's maybe been more noticeable in North America so far. Well, would you agree with that it's more a North American thing, or?
Well, as far as I know, but I have to admit I don't have a full picture of that. No, there's actually private equity in Scandinavia also in the seafood sector. I wouldn't know actually, but it's certainly there's certainly a lot of private equity involved in seafood transactions in North America. Yeah.
Yeah. And is that, well, I wonder how that kind of ties into the valuations that are put on things like kind of quotas and the raw materials in North America. Is that, are they able to kind of outcompete industry a bit more because of high valuations, or is that not necessarily a link?
I don't know. I saw Ignacio from Antarctica. He was saying, well, industry players need to step up, and I'm sure he smiled when he said it. I mean, I think the problem is at the prices where some companies are traded. I mean, as an industrial player, it's just, I mean, if we buy a company, we hold on to it for the rest of our lives, and therefore we do future discounted cash flows, and you see, okay, this is a good deal or not. Whereas if you buy a company with the intent of selling it 5 years after, then you do everything based on supply and demand of companies or assets, and not maybe supply and demand of seafood. And then you can arrive at different numbers. And I think what has happened recently is that all sorts of assets are being traded at very high prices, be that, I mean, publicly owned companies or art or houses or anything, used cars. So all assets increase in value, which means that your multiples for company transactions increase. And at the same time, 2021 was a very good year for snow crab, lobster, and a couple of other products in North America. So you have unusually high asset prices, meaning unusually high multipliers. And at the same time, you take that multiplier and you multiply it by an extraordinarily high result. And there you get a very high, I mean, very, very high valuation. And at least I mean, the way we do our spreadsheets, we have not been able to match in any way some of the prices which have been obtained in the M&A market recently. So I mean, but it's good for us in the very long term because it makes our company more valuable also, which is good for us and good for our owners, of course.
Yeah. Okay. And then I'd made a note to ask about the kind of the general M&A outlook for Royal Greenland. Obviously, you can't speak to what the company specifically will do in the coming years, but yeah, is there sort of a general something you can say about the position you leave it in, I guess?
I think that would not be so appropriate. I think I'll let other members of management or my successor at some point talk to that. I think, as I said, we strongly believe that I mean, valuations right now are very high, and as long as that is the case, then we're better off using our resources to grow organically.
Yeah.
I mean, but again, I mean, sometimes you think, sometimes something is overpriced, and then after 5 or 10 years, it turns out that it wasn't, and you're, I mean, it was you who were the fool, as it were. So.
Yeah. Okay. And I think the last question I had in mind was about Brexit, essentially, and yeah, how that has impacted Royal Greenland, and yeah, where again the kind of the status of the company when it comes to trading with the UK this year.
Okay. No, I think the heaviest impact of Brexit on us actually happened just after the vote, where the pound devalued, and over the months and quarters after that, we a lot of the product we previously sold into the UK, we had to sell into other markets. I really, really hope there will be a free trade agreement between Greenland and the UK. And I know politicians and civil servants on both sides have expressed an interest in that. So I just hope that will happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'd made a note to check if there was kind of anything else you wanted to bring up.
No, well, eat fish. It's healthy. No, it's all right. No, I think that's all right. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And